So good afternoon, everybody. My name is David Levi-Faur, and I'm professor for political science and public policy at the Hebrew University of Jerusalem. And I run this seminar as part of a series on theories of regulation and governance. And today with us, Jörn Ege, Michael Bauer, and their co-authors, Nora Wagner and Eva Thomann. And the topic is, does bureaucracy matter in making global public policy? Does it matter? We'll hear in a minute, but let me first introduce the authors of this paper that was recently published in Governance and can be found online. So Jörn Ege is a lecturer of local and regional governance at the Zurich University of Applied Sciences. Michael Bauer is the chair of public administration at the School of Transnational Governance at the European University Institute in Florence. Nora Wagner, co-author who will not join us probably today, is the advisor for the vice president for studying, teaching, and international affairs at the Rhine-Main University of Applied Sciences in Wiesbaden, Germany. And last and not least is Eva Thomann, a colleague of mine and editor of Regulation of Governance. Eva is a professor of public administration at the Department of Politics and Public Administration at the University of Constance. And now, with this short introduction, I'd like to thank you very much for your willingness to give this presentation, and the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, David. Now I go back sharing this to screen. Yeah, can you all see it?
Yeah, excellent.
Fantastic. Okay, so I will do the presentation. Michael will be available for the comments later. So we have about half an hour, if I understand it correctly. So we decided to do the division of labor like that. Okay, so the question, when does bureaucracy matter, is a very central one to the discipline of public administration. It goes back all the way to Max Weber, Woodrow Wilson, to the founding fathers of the discipline, and there was always the fear of a runaway bureaucracy, bureaucratic power, then the politics administration dichotomy, different images of bureaucrats and politicians were always quite central in the focus of the discipline. Bureaucratic influence is important at different levels, local level, regional, national as well. And it's also relevant in different phases of the policy process. Probably most pronounced in implementation research, street level bureaucrats are very important, but it's also, of course, an issue in agenda setting. So we, with this paper and with the project behind it, we try to take this central question to the transnational level. So there's an empirical trend. International organizations are becoming more important in world politics. There has been the war in Ukraine, of course, and COVID and stuff. So there has been a certain backlash of multilateralism, multilateral institutions. But what we see, if we take a longer term perspective, is that they are being delegated more competences. They employ more and more staff, and of course, these developments have been recognized in different academic disciplines. Most importantly, of course, international relations. They are concerned with these transnational, international trends. They study transboundary problems. So they are increasingly looking at international organizations as autonomous actors or as bureaucracy. And there are also more efforts to look into the black box of IO. So how are they organized? Who are the people working within them? How do they coordinate? And then, of course, also what role does the bureaucracy play in policymaking? And then you have the discipline of public administration, public management, which was quite focused on the nation state, but there is an increasing interest to think outside what's called the container of the nation state, to look at transnational actors, at networks, so to broaden the horizon here. And then, of course, we have traditional policy fields that are also becoming more global social policy, environmental policy is something that is, of course, very international, transnational. So there's the emergence of these globe-spanning policy fields. They are also recognized in research in this area. So in order to study the role of bureaucracies in international organizations, the first step that we decided to take a couple of years ago was to look at them as political administrative systems. And it basically looks like this. So you have the international system, you have different IOs here, you have transnational actors, and then you have the member states. They provide input. This can be personnel resources, financial resources, and then, of course, the votes that they take, and they produce decisions, policy outputs in form of resolutions, voluntary recommendations, regulations, and so forth. And if we look into this black box, you see the different actors, the different organs that are interesting within it. So you have the main decision-making body, the legislative assembly with the delegations from the member states. You have the management, the executive board, and then you have the bureaucracy, the international public administration. They provide services, and in return they get certain competencies, and they are controlled by the political principles here. And this is the basic understanding of international organizations and the bureaucracies that we took with our research group. Started almost 10 years ago now. So different scholars from different universities looked at different aspects of these international public administrations. Some looked at the administrative styles, some looked at expertise, others at evaluation, financial resources, and our project focuses on bureaucratic autonomy. And we want to find out when international public administrations have policy influence, and how important bureaucratic autonomy, understood in a structural way, how important autonomy is in this regard. And if we look at the literature, we found these three gaps when it comes to this research question. So it was not really clear how to observe bureaucratic influence, and also how to systematically compare it across cases. The role of autonomy was not really clear in the current research, and we have a good understanding of the different factors besides autonomy that affect bureaucratic influence, but not the exact configurations of these conditions for both the presence of influence and the absence. So let me go into some more details in these three gaps. So studying influence, a super important topic in political science and in public administration as well. But it's really hard to pin it down empirically. Especially if you look at it from a comparative perspective. So there are different ways of dealing with this problem. So there has been a paper by Jörn where he suggests different ways of measuring influence, process tracing, where you trace the occurrence and the behavior of the administration within the process, and then compare it to the outcome. Then you have the method of attributed influence, where you do a survey, often large scale, and you ask different actors that were involved in a political decision how important they think certain actors were, how influential they think they were. And then the last one is the method of assessing the degree of preference attainment, where you compare what the people involved want and what they got in the end. And if they got what they wanted, then you conclude that this is an instance of influence. But of course, all these methods, approaches have downsides. Process tracing only works for a small number of cases. Attributed influence is also problematic, because if you if you ask a lot of people about certain decisions, how can you make sure that they actually know in depth who was involved and who was actually influential? And then the last one, the problem is that, of course, if what you want is what you get, is not necessarily influence. There might be other explanations at hand. For instance, if the administration wants something and the politicians give it to them, they might have given it even without knowing what the administration wanted, right? So we have these problems, but what we argue in the paper is that if we combine especially the process tracing perspective with the third method, then we have a pretty good way to actually study bureaucratic influence comparatively. And this is how we observe influence in the paper. Our main argument is that you need three elements for influence to be fully successful. You need policy preferences of the administration. You need a certain kind of entrepreneurial behavior. And then you need a congruence between what the administration wants and what the final policy outcome is. And we argue that if you have all these three elements present, then you can actually speak of bureaucratic influence here. Okay, that's the main dependent variable, the main outcome that we want to study. Now, a few words about autonomy. So it's a core concept of public administration. I think it's safe to say that. And there is always this goal conflict between making an administration effective and efficient. So they need resources, they need competencies, they need autonomy. But on the other hand, they might try and escape political control. They might develop a life of its own, and that is of course a problem. So within this, there is a difficult balance to find. So for the paper, we go back to this definition by Marchetti and Verhoost, where they say that being autonomous means above all to be able to translate one's own preferences into authoritative action. And we use different structural features to operationalize autonomy for a number of international administrations. So in a paper published in CHAP, I think we compared 16 international administrations, and then later on, I think we went up to 20. But the question, of course, is: does this autonomy that we observe here, does it really matter? Does it make a difference? And so this leads us to the question of the paper: under what conditions does structural autonomy lead to influence? Just one more word about the concept as we use it. I've read out the definition, but we make also a conceptual distinction here. We distinguish between autonomy of will, which relates to the capacity of the International Secretariat to develop autonomous preferences, and second, to autonomy of action, which then is the ability of the Secretariat to translate these preferences into action. Exactly. And then regarding the third gap that we observe in the literature, the different factors. So yeah, there are these lists of factors that matter for influence in IR research, in public administration, in public policy. But with what is actually not quite clear is how they interact and what configurations of these conditions lead to influence. And of course, we cannot study all these factors, so we focus on what we think are the most important ones. So we consider functional factors, especially programmatic complexity of the underlying problem. So how complex is the problem at hand, and how much knowledge, how much technical expertise is required from the administration or from politicians to address this problem. Second condition is power related. It's political contestation. So we focus on contestation among the constituents of the IO. So this is basically the member states, but in case of the International Labour Organization, for instance, you have also workers and employers. So it's the contestation among the constituents, but mostly member states. And then we focus on two bureaucratic factors, and this is the two types of autonomy that I introduced previously: autonomy of will on the one hand, and autonomy of action on the other. And yeah, with these different ingredients, we have our analytical framework for the paper. We have policy influence as our dependent variable, so the aspect of a decision that can be attributed to the presence and behavior of the international public administration. And remember, you need these three ingredients, these three elements: policy preferences, entrepreneurialism, and congruence. And then we focus on the three or four main conditions: complexity, contestation, autonomy of will, and autonomy of action. And in order to apply this theoretical framework to our empirical data, we use a method called Qualitative Comparative Analysis, which allows us to detect causally complex configurations and necessary and sufficient conditions for influence. Case selection. We have two steps that we need to do because policy influence occurs at the level of individual decisions. So we first need to select international organizations, and here we try to select different degrees of structural autonomy in the four IOs. And as you can see here, we actually did not manage to get all configurations. We're missing a case where autonomy of will and autonomy of action is present, but we also tried to limit our investigation to organizations in the field of social regulations. So we could not just easily take an economic organizations that would feature this configuration and include it in the analysis. So these were some concessions that we had to make here, and it as you later see, it also limits our generalizations, but that's the sample that we decided to go with. And then in these four organizations, we had to identify relevant policies, relevant policy outputs. And to do that, we did an online survey. We asked staff, member states, and also stakeholders what they think are the most important decisions, and we focused on the ones that got mentioned the most. And then the main data collection was done by interviews. We did 69. The four organizations are based in Geneva and in Rome. So we went there and talked to them. And of course, the interviews were anonymous, but some, especially people in the permanent representations, they wouldn't mind taking pictures and also have their name mentioned. So here we got this nice picture that we got in 2019 at the embassy of Zimbabwe. So we transcribed all the interviews, put them in Max QDA, and then we coded the conditions and the outcome to range from 0 to 1 with these intermediate steps, 0.33, 0.66, to get some more detail into the coding. And then in the end, we have 17 cases, which in themselves are, I call them mini case studies here, because there are a couple of interviews and documents that together constitute the case And the method of QCA just helps us to make sense of these, medium-sized number of cases, because it's really, there's a danger that you get lost in the data, and QCA is just a very nice way to condense the information. Here are the selected policies. ILO, WHO, UNESCO, and FAO are our organizations, and these are the individual decisions that we study. And here you can see the distribution of the outcome and the different conditions, and you already see here that the administration is actually quite influential in many cases here. And that's quite surprising, to be honest. We didn't think that they would be that prominent, but that's a very interesting finding here. And here you can also see the problem with the autonomy of will and action situation. There are several organizations.
Jörn, can you explain better what's in this figure for the benefit of students and graduate students who don't follow? So start, just make it simple.
Okay, so what you see here is the distribution of the different conditions. So which case falls into which category, basically. So if a case is contested, then the set membership is 1, and the frequency or the case counts towards the frequency of the set membership in 1. And
so you have 14 cases altogether, and in the contestation, 4 are distributed as 1. There is a lot of contestation, and the others are 0, or
exactly. So we have these 17 cases, and about 1 quarter of them is contested, and 3/4 are not contested. And the same with complexity and the other organizations. But the most important one, I think, is our dependent variable, our main outcome, what we want to explain. Here, most cases are actually cases that feature bureaucratic influence, and only a few cases actually show no influence. Okay. So I also want to give you some illustrations from our interviews. So here is a quote from a member state representative who is very aware that even if a certain country proposes a text for adoption, they also have to be very careful to think, okay, who is behind that? Might it be from the secretariat, and what is the agenda of the secretariat? And then I show you another quote from the WHO, International Civil Servant, so a person who works in the WHO. And this one is about NCDs, non-communicable diseases. And he explained that the process, even though you might think that it's member state driven, it's very crucial that the secretariat is, as he put it, the invisible hand pushing from behind and providing some kind of vision here. So if they wouldn't push the agenda, then this particular decision would not have happened. So this is a clear example of successful influence. Okay. So if you put the information from these 17 case studies together, if you code them, then you end up with what is called a truth table. So here you can see the different conditions: autonomy of will, autonomy of action, complexity, and contestation. And if there is a 1, this means that the case is characterized by autonomy of will. If there is a 0 in autonomy of action, then there is no autonomy of action. And if the case is written here in bold, then it's actually a case of influence. And if it's not written in bold, then it's a case of non-influence. So what you can already see here is there is no necessary condition for influence, because none of these conditions is always present when influence occurs. So what we are left with is sufficient conditions. And to study sufficient conditions, we have a program that helps us to identify sufficient paths, and this needs to be done for both high influence and low influence separately. So what we see here in this table, it looks very complicated, but it's actually quite simple. You have three paths that lead to influence. You have this one path here, and it means that high autonomy of will and a high degree of complexity leads always, in our cases, to influence. The second path is high autonomy of will and a high degree of contestation leads to influence. And the third one is a path where autonomy is not relevant, where if a case is complex and contested at the same time, this also leads to influence. And I want to give you a short example for number 2. So there I have the example of the Rome Declaration on Nutrition in the Food and Agriculture Organization. So the high autonomy of the FAO Secretariat allowed it to play a highly influential role. Because you can see that, because the initiative for the Central Conference, the International Conference on Nutrition, originally came from the Secretariat, from the FAO Secretariat, and the administration was very committed to bring the global food situation back on the international agenda. By shifting the focus from food security to food systems, which included all forms of malnutrition, the Secretariat was able to convince the member states, but also the FAO leadership, that such a conference is absolutely necessary and should be organized even earlier as planned. So this extension of the substantive focus influenced both the negotiations that took place during the conference and the content of the declaration, which was the main output. So autonomy of will, I just explained, and the contestation is also clearly visible here in the case description, because food policy is a very controversial topic, and especially countries with a strong food industry, they were very opposed to several measures that would achieve healthier nutrition. So think of Italy, for instance. Italy, you have Ferrero. It's a very powerful company, and they don't want, or they're not very eager to see healthier nutrition on the international agenda. But in the end, after the FAO Secretariat pushed and also consulted and provided background information, technical support, they were able to eliminate existing conflicts and reframe some of the opposition to then advocate this conference and bridging the divide between the member states, which was absolutely essential to then adopt the declaration in 2014. So that's an example, a case example of how our analysis works, or what kind of configurations the analysis was able to extract by example of the second path here. Then, as I said, you should, when you apply QCA, you should always analyze the occurrence of your outcome separately from the non-occurrence. So the idea is that influence could have different explanations from non-influence. And that's why we have used low influence as a second in a second analysis, and here we have identified the two paths that lead to non-influence. So if you see that the tilde here, this always means absence of. So the absence of autonomy of will and the absence of autonomy of action and high complexity and the absence of contestation, this leads to no influence or low influence. And then we have a second path that is also important, but I'm not going to read that out. You can have a look at the presentation. So what does this all mean? It looks very complicated. But I try to summarize it for you very, very briefly in the main findings here. So international secretariats, international public administrations can be very influential in IO policymaking if the context is favorable. This means if you have contested decisions where a lot of technical expertise, knowledge from the administration is required, and if the decisions are contested, if member states are not yet sure what they want, if they have different opinions on the matter, then international administrations can be influential. And here autonomy does not play a role. But autonomy becomes important if the context is less favorable. So if either contestation or complexity are not present. So autonomy of will is important because high levels of autonomy of will lead the international secretariat to exert influence in these less favorable contexts where either highly complex or highly contested policy issues can be observed. And vice versa, low levels of autonomy together with different constellations of issue complexity and low issue contestations lead to low levels of influence. And surprisingly enough, autonomy of action is not relevant in our analysis. We also did some additional case studies here to see if we missed some factors. There was quite a prominent part in the paper actually, but since the space in papers is always really limited, and we already have an annex of I think 80 pages, we decided to not put the post-QCA case studies very prominently in the paper, but move them to the annex. But what we find here is that in addition to these four conditions that we studied, trust in the administration is also important, and the salience of a policy issue. So if the stakeholders consider a policy decision very important, then this also plays a role as a factor that can explain non-influence. Okay, that's the main findings, and maybe just I have 28 minutes on my clock, so I will make the half hour. The main contribution and the outlook. I think what we show here, what is very surprising is that international secretariats are highly influential actors. So in most of the decisions that we study, they play a very, very central role. And autonomy also matters, but only autonomy of will, and only in what we call less favorable contexts. So if complexity is not present and contestation is not present. Of course, we also have some important limitations. The most important one, I think, is related to the fact that we don't have an organization with high autonomy of will and high autonomy of action, which makes it very difficult to make a statement about unobserved configurations, of course. But overall, I think we have a good model, a very parsimonious model that can explain 76% of the cases that we observe here. And if you are not interested in international administration, but look for something that would help you study at bureaucratic influence at the local level, then I think our measurement tool and our general approach might also be useful for you in these other contexts, because it gives you a really clear and systematic way of first observing, operationalizing policy influence, also from a comparative angle, and with the QCA and the medium number of cases that we study, also a nice methodology to make sense of the 17 cases that are not so easily done in a comparative case study design. Okay, that's it from my side. Thank you very much. Looking forward to your questions.
Thank you very much, Jörn. And maybe, Michael, do you want to add the general context and suggestion, or shall I ask questions?
You may ask questions, of course. I guess that's the best thing we can do at that point.
Any question in particular that you think I should ask, both of you? I have questions. Don't worry.
You ask
Don't
us.
worry at all,
We
but
have questions
I
on us.
Yeah. So if you want me to ask question later on, just mention it. I will ask you as follow. So what is the implications for global governance, the way global governance is moving? What is the trend that you are identifying? And to what extent your findings would also be similar if we analyze the EU bureaucracy and, of course, the national bureaucracy. So this kind of same factors will feature to explain bureaucratic autonomy. So just to summarize, trends, general conclusions on what you see in global governance, but also to what extent it's valid in multi-level or different system, national, local, European, etc.
Michael, do you want to pick one?
Since you did a whole great job in presenting, maybe I take over here a bit as a start. First, and I think it came now very, very well out in the presentation of Jörn. So thanks a lot, Jörn. Is that the big, let's say, we are proud that we think we can provide here a blueprint how to study influence. So now, of course, it's always the question if you analyze something, what kind of elements do you put and focus on, right? So we don't claim we have all kind of factors under the sun, but we have the main factors according to, let's say, our reference literature in this model. And this model is, of course, complex, but that makes us also modest in terms of what is achievable in this kind of comparative empirical research. But if you want to comparatively empirically study autonomy or the influence of bureaucracies, I think we can provide you now with a, let's say, benchmark. You may adapt it, you may kind of criticize it, do something else, but I think we have a very strong kind of sequential way now defined how to do this. Not in order if you want to make a case study and study the mechanisms behind some influence, but rather if you want to go into a comparative kind of avenue. And that is applicable to all kind of organizations, public organizations, in bureaucracies at all levels. So it's not, it's not context specific in that sense. It is rather something that you can put it to the local level, you can put it to the regional level, or to the international level. So I think this is a big advantage, because somehow maybe it's also to discuss, but in our reading, in our kind of research, we thought that is missing, because you would either say, okay, this is influence, and then jump to things that explain you this influence. Or you would say, okay, bureaucratic autonomy is a central kind of theme, so we study bureaucratic autonomy. But there were linkages, or there are linkages, and I think we showed them very well. Autonomy, bureaucratic autonomy is one element if you want to, determine the role of the bureaucracy in policy making, but it's in itself, it needs a context that we think we can provide.
Yeah,
and if you allow me last kind of thing, which is very important, and which was one of the, which makes it, I mean, are we further? Did we solve a lot of things? Maybe not, because there's one element, or we did for us, but maybe not for everybody, because one thing is that this influence and autonomy studies are elusive in a way that you need the object. And that is so often forgotten. It's so difficult to do. I think that was for our project that run, 6 years funding, but much longer, maybe 8 years in total. To kind of, if you want to prove really influence, you need the cases. And you need to make the cases comparative. You need to be able to have different cases, but they cannot be the same cases. They have to come from different contexts. And I hope, I mean, that is what we hope, that with showing that it's possible, with all limitations, we can talk in a minute, lots of limitations, as usual in empirical research, but by providing this kind of analytical tools, and by suggesting a way how to bring in the policy cases, I think we managed to be some small steps further than before this project.
Thank you very much, Michael. I knew that you will have something very important to say, and I'm happy that I led you there in some way, but you found it yourself, basically. So next question from Carlos Bravo Laguna.
Yes, thank you. Well, I'm a postdoctoral fellow at the Hebrew University of Jerusalem. Thank you very much for this presentation. My question is, did you take into account the source of authority for the international organization? Specifically, I'm referring to the distinction between delegated and pooling of authority by the member states that form part of this international organization. So does this matter at all for the influence or the way that these organizations exercise influence? And did you take these criteria into account for your case selection? Thank you.
Can I answer, Michael?
Sure.
Yeah. It's a very good question. I mean, especially Lisbeth Hoch and Gary Marks, they have around the same time, started to look at delegation and pooling at the international level. What we did when we designed our autonomy concept, and when we thought about, okay, how does this relate to delegation? How does this relate to pooling? We did some comparisons. So we calculated correlations between our two dimensions, autonomy of will and autonomy of action, and delegation and pooling, and we added them together, and we tried to see how close they are, and it turns out that they're actually related. So you could argue that the more authoritative an organization is, the more autonomous they are as well. But if we have the distinction between the two dimensions, will and action, then this correlation actually becomes weaker. So to answer your question with a very long answer, we used the comparison with the delegation and pooling to design the concept and to see how well it works, but we did not include it here in the analysis, because autonomy and authority are quite closely linked. So if we look at autonomy, especially for the case selection, then it would not work if we also consider delegation or pooling. So I can't really tell you how this relates to the explanatory factor or explanatory power of these two concepts.
I would like to make two comments, if I may, to this question, because it's a very important one. it's important also, if I understand you correctly, because of the question of, so do we get further, right? Is there accumulation in the field, yeah? And there was a time, 2 comments here, there was a time when all this started, where Lisbeth and Gary and colleagues were also not so far advanced, and we would know of each other. And there was a 3rd project in the WZB Berlin somewhere. So we had this kind of dream, oh, that's great. We can kind of put this all together and kind of triangle, our concepts, because somehow they are, and this is the second comment, they are closely related, but there's some overlap, but they're not the same. And somehow we reiterate also our disciplinary kind of epistemologies, right? So we come from public administration, so we have this bureaucratic autonomy kind of a head-on, or this kind of perspective, and there is an overlap, but not complete with all these other things. So our hope was we could do pool this at a certain point, but it never worked out because many of the organizations were different. The coding, it didn't come about. I would be happy, if somebody did this kind of work and came up with some more greater triangled database. I'm not sure eventually whether from the epistemology it would really help, because in the end we are coined, but also biased, openly biased from our disciplines, right? So you come from an international relation kind of background, you look on organizations, and there's always this thing, it's not the administration that you are interested in. Administration is maybe one component, and then you are in delegation and in other issues. And for us, it's the other way around. We come from public administration, we have a sociological view of public administration, so we come with a whole luggage of other things. So I find this extremely interesting, but also in terms of accumulation frustrating, because it ends up, because we are all limited, we all take only kind of bits of the reality, try to make it observable, but it ends up being much less accumulative than we thought at the beginning 10 years ago.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. And we have a question from Sevi, please.
Sevi, hello.
Hello, everybody. Really nice to see you. Yes, long time.
Or not to hear you at least. Yeah.
Yes, I'm happy to see you all. Actually, can you hear me now? Because I am actually in London in a cafe following you. Really enjoying the presentation, and of course I know your work, and I'm teaching it. And I have a question because I found very interesting what Jörn just said. In his presentation, because we have there 4 organizations, but when I'm thinking about the differences between ILO, FAO, and WHO, they are all dealing with very different types of policy areas, like more regulatory, more guidelines. They have a different authority in developing, in not only influencing policy, but also they have a different authority in making decisions and imposing rules, right? So, for example, when it comes to
Sevi, we don't need example. I think we go to the question because we don't hear you.
Yes, yeah, but it is very much related to what I'm saying. So, why I'm talking about this? Because you brought the example of the food case, and I was wondering, how does influence of these organizations differ if we have different type of mobilization, bottom up, different type of interest organizations that are more organized or not?
Thank you, Sevi.
Okay.
Usually I leave the difficult answers to Jörn, but let me make it try. There's an official, I mean, I have an official answer, and I have if I understand the question rightly, I have an official answer and I have a pragmatic answer, right? So if you ask me whether I would do this sample again, precisely that one, and I'm looking a bit to Jörn because we discussed this a lot during the project. Maybe I would like to change it a bit, But we selected these 4 institutions under the perspective we want to have something like comparable as much as possible. But of course, all these international organizations do different things. So it's very difficult to keep these contextual kind of policy fields homogeneous. It's virtually impossible. So you always go for a compromise. So our compromise was saying, okay, we don't want security. We don't want European kind of stuff. We want really UN. There should be, quite some time there so that we have a field around them and a kind of a developed policy field. And so we come up with these more social economic regulations, right? So, there's always some kind of painful decisions you have to do, and there is no excuse in the end, because now we find that we would like to have other constellations after all, and we come into the defensive. But I'd say we are not so in the defensive because, except maybe for the ILO, I have my personal kind of opinion about the ILO, but for the policy cases we looked at very carefully. Of course, we don't go into, let's say, specific details per se, but we look on very, comparable kind of issues of influence, of kind of, interaction patterns, or let's say we look at this in a very kind of coded and abstract ways. That's a bit of compromise. We say, I think that's a big advantage in this project. I mean, we really look into cases. Yeah, of course, to make them comparable, you also be very abstract about the individual policy cases, but at least we have them. Yeah, and I don't know a lot of projects that would, go this way. I mean, not only stopping at the, institutional kind of thing, saying something about the autonomy, but also trying to connect this then to the next level. Is it ideal? And now comes the informal answer, right? No, I mean, no. There is a lot of things I would like to do differently now or better. I think there is improvement always. It's not, but still I think we can defend this approach. That's why we insist so much and hope that somebody takes it up, because I get too old. Jörn has other things that he wants to do now, but it would, it's actually a pity not to take this approach and maybe also make it easier or nicer or more applicable, better applicable, and put it into other contexts.
Maybe just a very short addition to that. What we do not look at is outcome or impact, right? So we stop at the output level. If you look at it from a public policy or a policy success perspective, right? So whether the decision is just a recommendation or whether it's mandatory for the member states or other stakeholders to comply with, this is not within the scope of our analysis. So I think here we have some comparability because we just take the decision at our main anchor point and we look at the influence on this decision. But if the people follow, not our business anymore.
Thank you. A quick question and the short one. Short question, short answer from Jose Maria Venezuela, please. We don't hear you, Jose.
You have to
unmute yourself. Unmute
I'll
yourself.
just start saying, but I feel like this is like the jump from the old institutional analysis to the behavioral turn in political science. It's the comparison to the design, international organization design literature to the empirics. I have a question about budgets and the relevance of budgets as a important dimension. I think within there's many interesting discussions about how new stakeholders, let's say the Gates Foundation, are becoming kind of principals in these relations. And I wonder, in part because they have so much budget to lure all of these institutions to work with and follow their premises and their guidelines rather than the original principles, the governments. So I wonder whether you have anything interesting to say to follow your work based on these complicating factors.
Yeah, I can safely leave this to Jörn, that made a wonderful analysis of the budget politics in our field.
Yeah, yeah, maybe two points. One specific about the relationship between autonomy and financing. You're completely right. The sources of the money sources, the financial resources of IOs are changing, and we see non-state actors becoming more involved, and we also see changes from mandatory contributions to voluntary contributions, and there are always strings attached, right? So the person who gives the money can tell them what to do with it. So this is a huge problem. We're debating this in the context of the WHO in the COVID context, and we wrote a paper where we looked at how changes in financing affected the staffing, and we think that this is actually quite a problem, that the staffing of IOs is becoming more difficult. People are leaving because they're more on short-term contracts, so it's really difficult to stop the brain drain in IOs and to keep good people within the organization. And the other thing, one of the cases that we look at in the analysis that I presented is FENSA. That's the framework on the engagement with non-state actors in the WHO, and there was really interesting to see how difficult it was to actually adopt this framework, because it would regulate the access of the private sector when cooperating with the WHO. And it was one of the more fascinating cases in the sample, where you could really see that there are a lot of interests involved. Some people want to take non-state actors and the private sector on board because they provide money. Others are more cautious because they fear that they lead the organization somewhere it shouldn't go to. But yeah, I leave it at that, I think.
Thank you very much, Jörn. Thank you very much, Michael. Thank you very much for all participants. I have few sentences to say. First of all, excellent presentation. It reminded me that we need the introduction to QCA in this series, especially if we are looking for undergraduate students. We will continue to take some classes in summer classes for graduate ones. And also, Carlos, that you can combine network analysis with QCA some days, sometimes, but also that international organization, international bureaucracy is becoming much more important. And with it, the global governance regime, regulatory regime, regulocracy, which is a form of bureaucracy. So we speak the same language. And that's all for me. Just read the paper. It's in the pioneering journal called Governance. And we are looking for the book.
Yeah,
material enough for a book.
Maybe a ruthless kind of advertisement thing. We just complete, because we are one project, we from among 7, and the reports are all there and published now. I think Knill Steinebach in Routledge. So you have a kind of nice kind of reports, papers about the individual kind of projects that reflect very well the way how it is done, not only the results. So it's for researchers very interesting, we hope, in 2022, Routledge, Steinebach, Knill.
Excellent. Give me the details. I will put them on the YouTube in the comments so people can access it. Thank you very much, and see you soon.
Thanks for having us. Thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you very much for giving us the opportunity to present. Thank you, David. Thank you all.
See you soon. Bye.
Bye. Bye-bye.